Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's ASEAN Midday Market Watch. Our guest today is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank in Singapore. Vishnu, great to have you on the show again.
As always, it's good for me to be here. Thank you.
Now, Vishnu, let's take a quick look at how markets in the region have been performing this morning, and then we'll get some insights from you. We'll start with Bursa Malaysia. It's at 1,595.81. It's down 0.12%. SGX is at 3,178.38. It's down 0.3%. The Nikkei is down 0.35% at 29,646.19. But across the rest of the markets, it's a sea of green. It's 3,401.72 on the Shanghai Composite. It's up 0.15%. The Hang Seng is at 28,850. It's up 1.24%. The ASX 200 is up 0.57% at 7,016.16. And rounding off, we've got the Kospi, which is at 3,178.92. It's up 0.34%. What's your view on how markets have performed this morning, Vishnu?
Well, I mean, it does look like the somewhat cautious theme has carried over into markets. And I think that's how they remain consistent with how overnight markets were, as well as how the futures are doing. I think at the end of the day, markets are digesting sometimes conflicting information about hopes for growth, very strong growth recovery, but at the same time also concerns of a very divergent path, one that may also be fraught further by cost increases that run ahead of the growth and demand recovery.
Absolutely. Now, unexpected numbers by some people. Singapore economy announced this morning that grew 0.2% in the first quarter of 2021 from a year ago. Now, that's significantly better than what some analysts were actually expecting. They actually expected a contraction of as much as 0.5%. Now, where has this growth come from, Vishnu?
Well, I think we can start off by saying that it's not a complete surprise. On our end, we expected a very mild positive output,
Okay.
and it does, I think, reassure somewhat that it is out of a recession, and not just in sequential terms, but also in year-on-year terms. And the growth, a lot of it was driven by external boost factors. So a lot of the tailwinds that came from a pickup in external demand, including pharmaceuticals, that went to be shown up, showed up in the industrial production numbers, as well as exports numbers, and not to mention that with the gradual phased reopening of the economy from a very low base, there was an ability for some recovery coming through initially, with a bit of boost from property as well. But bear in mind that the low base effects will only start coming through from second quarter onwards, which means theoretically the numbers can get better, which is exactly why the MAS alluded to the fact that growth in all likelihood is going to overshoot the 4 to 6% guidance given earlier.
And the MAS has erred on the side of caution and kept its exchange rate policy basically unchanged.
I think that's certainly true, but I wanted to add that at the end of the day, the MAS also refuses to be seduced by distortions, and this is something that we bear in mind. We're coming from a very low base, so some numbers are going to look exceptionally flattered. We're also coming out into a bumpy recovery that is further obfuscated by pent-up demand. So the MAS very rightly doesn't want to assume a linear path in terms of the demand recovery, and so they remain quite circumspect, particularly in the context of the fact that the global recovery is taking place in a very patchy manner, and that also applies to the regional economies, and Singapore is very dependent on the regional and the global picture.
And also one of the key things to the regional economy is that there's an underlying worry that the vaccination rollouts across the region are not going as planned as well.
This is very true. We have seen quite a bit of setbacks, not just peculiar to the region. It has been a global phenomenon, but it is exacerbated by the fact that we've had a resurgence in places like India, which then hampers India's ability to deliver affordable vaccines to the other parts of the world. And so all these will have a knock-on impact, because what it does is it squeezes the available global supply, and it also hits hard with the reality of the on-the-ground vaccination timeline being somewhat more drawn out. For those reasons, the thought of herd immunity occurring in Q3 or Q4 looks rather optimistic now. So you make a very good point that disappointment there must factor into the growth path forward.
Yeah. Now, I want to take you on another track towards China, because there are significant worries about the Huarong saga and the contagion effect. Now, are those contagion worries overdone?
I'll take you up on your path and tell you that many paths lead to China, and there are many paths out of it. And that's where I want to start with Huarong. So there are very justifiable concerns that there will be a contagion impact, because Huarong at the end of the day is a, if you may, it's a asset manager, but it also houses a lot of bad assets, so on and so forth, things that are not very liquid. So any contagion impact from there can turn out to be inadvertently bad for the market. But equally, there's also a sense that with the Ministry of Finance stake in it, and the fact that the government would not want to unravel the wider asset markets, there should be some backstop. What we take away from this, and what's important for the markets here, is that at the end of the day, the macro factors could point towards a fairly good recovery in China and a fairly good performance for the economy. But when it comes down to individual companies and individual credit risks, it then becomes a binary event, and it's very difficult to call. The real question...
I want to put you on a spot here. So is the Huarong saga contagion worries overdone?
I think if we look at the pricing, the static pricing in the markets, it suggests that the contagion worry is not overdone. So you don't have it in default territory or overdone fears of that. But to some extent, the marginal worries about it, which could then carry over into panic, that will be overdone, because we have yet to really get a full picture of how policymakers will lean into this, and how much of it is a political risk, and how much of it would then fall back on the wider economic backstop.
Now, Vishnu, looking ahead for the rest of the week, what are the key data points and events that could move markets?
Well, I think, as we go into the rest of the week, we bear in mind that for the regional perspective, we've got the Bank of Korea that's coming out tomorrow. The big anchor event for the week is going to be China GDP numbers, which is somewhat peculiar, because we know this is going to be an exceptionally strong number given the very low base in Q1. And what's really important is not backward-looking Q1, but rather forward-looking momentum change for China. Nevertheless, markets will still obsess over it. There'll still be good or bad news to be taken away from that. And I think that would set the tone for a little bit of a backstop in Asia, given that China is still doing well in Q1. That would be the takeaway for markets. As we go into next week, I think further communique from the Fed as well as ECB policymakers will remain at the fore as markets try to digest the tensions between keeping policy intact and the recovery story taking place in the US.
Now, thanks for your insights, Vishnu.
My pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, on BizTech's ASEAN Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out www.biztech.asia